Before we start the video, get your popcorn ready, subscribe to our channel, and smash the like button and buckle up, because it's about to get crazy. My dad disappeared for years and came back with a new family. You're probably wondering how all that played out. Well, let me tell you, it was a crazy experience. You probably wouldn't believe it, but trust me when I say it's 100% true. I grew up as an only daughter with my mom and dad. We were always happy and always laughing. On Sundays, we always had a game night. We would play Monopoly and Ludo and Jenga. It was so fun. I would bake cakes with my mom. I really loved baking. And with my dad, we would drive to a nearby lake and go fishing. I wasn't your typical teenager. I loved and respected them both. I wanted to spend as much time as possible with them. So it really came as a shock to me when my dad disappeared, only to find him with a new family. But I'll get into that later. For now, let me rewind to when it first began. My dad worked for this marketing company that moved its location around quite a lot. Instead of forcing us to relocate every couple of months or so, my dad would drive out to certain locations to complete his work. And one night, he had a meeting several hundred miles away. He took his car, said goodbye to my mom and I, and headed off. He left really early in the morning, giving him ample time to reach the meeting, even if there was traffic. My mom and I didn't really think much of it. He drove far distances for work all the time. But when nighttime came and Dad still wasn't home, we started to worry. We suspected maybe he got into an accident or something, or maybe he was lost. He was always home on time. This was so unlike him. Eventually, when the clock struck 12, we decided to call the police. They searched the route he was on, asking passerbys if they had seen my dad, but no one had noticed anything. There were no reports of a crash, nor were there any reports of my dad's vehicle. It's like he vanished out of thin air. Meanwhile, my mom and I were freaking out. We feared he could have been kidnapped, or worse, dead. We imagined him in the woods somewhere, lost, dying of starvation. That night, we hardly slept. The next morning, we immediately drove out to the highway he had traveled on. We drove all the way to where his meeting point was, but still there were no clues as to where he had disappeared to. On the way back, we were passing through a narrow lane cutting through a forest. When I asked my mom to pull over, "I need to pee," I told her. She stopped the car at the side of the road and I jumped out, rushing to the edge of the forest. But then I halted. There was something on the ground, a piece of paper or something. I leaned down, picking it up, and I cried out, "Mom, come take a look at this." "What is it?" she asked. I handed the piece of paper to her. "Look, it's a receipt for 2 bottles of orange juice." My mom looked at me incredulously. I nodded. This could have been Dad's. You see, my dad was an orange juice fanatic. He had it every day with practically every meal. He lived, breathed, and hungered for orange juice. It couldn't be a mere coincidence that on the very route he had traveled down that night, a receipt for orange juice was found. On the way to the meeting or on the way back, whichever, he could have easily stopped for orange juice. It was perfectly plausible. My mom told me not to jump to conclusions. This could be anybody's. But I was convinced. Dad had been down this road. So maybe he was somewhere close to here? I begged and begged my mom to call the police and tell them about this place. They should conduct a search expedition here. She was hesitant at first, but she could see the desperation in my eyes and relented. The next day, the search party arrived, and what they found changed everything. A car down the hill smashed into the side of a tree. Its front was crumpled and it was covered in leaves, but there was no mistaking it. That was my dad's car. My mom and I were so relieved, but also worried. Dad's body wasn't in the car, which meant he had survived the crash. But then, where was he? If he had gotten out safe, surely he would have rushed straight home. If not, then did that mean he was injured somewhere, lost in the woods? We searched the rest of the forest that day, but there was no sign of him, not so much as a footprint. We ended the day of searching disappointed. I still had hope we would find my dad. When I woke up in the morning, I always expected him to be in the kitchen like he always was, cooking some eggs and bacon, whistling a melody. But every morning I would run down the stairs and find the kitchen empty. My dad was still missing. I really, truly thought we would find him, but the days fell away to weeks, then weeks to months, and still we had no idea where Dad was. Before we knew it, the 1-year anniversary for Dad's disappearance was coming up, and we were starting to think Dad was dead. Why else would he be gone for so long? He must have gotten lost in the woods and starved to death. That was the only explanation. My therapist encouraged me to move on, to get going with my life, but I found it so hard. I still believed my dad was out there somewhere, and I guess he was. 2 weeks after my dad's 1-year disappearance, I was shopping at the grocery store buying some stuff for Mom when I thought I saw someone familiar. It was a man, his back facing me, with a green cap on. I thought I recognized something in his physique, the way he carried himself. Then he turned around and I nearly screamed out in surprise. It was my dad. My dad! He was alive! He had grown a beard, but I would recognize him anywhere. He was standing all the way on the other side of the store, so I had to sprint to try and reach him. But then a crowd of people surged past, and I got lost in the sea of people. They pushed me down an aisle, and by the time I got to the spot Dad was standing, he was gone. I searched everywhere. I ran all around the store. I went outside to see if he had left, but there was nothing. No sign. I was terrified he was going to disappear just like last time. Eventually, after 2 hours of searching, I went home. When I arrived home, I told Mom all about it. I told her how I found Dad, how he was in the grocery store. My mom's face had lit up at first when I told her I'd spotted Dad, but then her features slowly melted away into disappointment. "Honey, I think you were just hallucinating," she said to me. "No, I wasn't. It was real. I'm sure of it," I said. "Then why hasn't he come back to us?" she said sadly. "Why would he be so close, but not even bother telling us he was alive?" She made a good point. It was very strange, and it was much more logical than I had envisioned it. My therapist always said visions and hallucinations of our lost loved ones were quite common in the stages of grief. So I nodded at my mom and I didn't speak of it again. The next week I went to the grocery store again, but this time my mom came. We arrived at the store and went to work getting all the stuff on our list. We were planning on making a huge roast dinner that night. Mom was going to make apple pie. We felt like we deserved a treat. As we strolled down the aisles picking up ingredients, I spotted a green cap again. I wiped my eyes and sure enough, there it was. That green cap. I stepped to the side to get a better look and there he was, standing nonchalantly. My dad. "Mom, come here quick," I called. Mom rushed over. "What is it? What's wrong?" she asked. I pointed over to the man who looked exactly like my father, and I watched as the color drained from my mom's face. She was carrying a carton of milk, but it dropped to the ground and spilled milk everywhere. My mom and I stood frozen in place, paralyzed with shock at the sight of my dad, her husband, who had been lost to us for over a year, standing mere meters away. I was about to call out, to run to him with relief, when a woman walked over to him. She seemed to know him, and we watched in horror as she leaned over and kissed him fully on the mouth. In her hands, she clutched a small baby, obviously a newborn, and Dad promptly bent down to kiss the baby on the head. We couldn't believe our eyes. My dad with a new girlfriend and a baby? What? No way this could be real. No way could Dad do something like that to us. But there he was, standing right there. Seeing was believing, I guess. I couldn't take it anymore. I motioned to my mom to follow, whose face was frozen with a hurt look, and I walked over to my dad. I was going to confront him. I was going to demand why he left us, why he abandoned us. I tapped him on the shoulder and he turned around, smiling slightly at me. He didn't even look fazed by my appearance, as if I was just anybody, a stranger, not his own daughter. I bit back the pain in my heart and spoke up. "How could you do this, Dad?" My father's smile fell away and he frowned. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," I said nervously. "You're a coward." My dad cocked his head. "I'm sorry, do I know you?" I stepped back in shock. What sort of game was he playing? This was sick. My mom stepped forward and she looked at my dad suspiciously. "Stop it, Howard," she addressed him. "This is serious." "Howard?" My dad scratched his head. "I'm really sorry, but you've got me mistaken for somebody else. My name is Elijah." Then the woman who kissed my dad, stepped forward. "Is everything all right?" she asked. "These people say they know me," said Dad. She looked at us curiously. "Oh, well, they might know you." She looked at us closely. This might come as a shock, but Elijah's lost his memories. He has amnesia, you see. My world spun out of control. This woman, she wasn't making any sense. My dad just wouldn't forget us. But then I remember the crash. how he stumbled off, how we knew that if he were alive, he would come home. But that's the thing, he was alive, but he just couldn't remember the family he was supposed to come home to. I have to say that the ordeal was very uncomfortable and awkward. We explained to this woman who said her name was Maddie that we were Dad's family, that I was his daughter, and my mom was his wife. Maddie was surprised, to say the least. She told us she had married Elijah, or to us, Howard, a couple of months ago, and this was their baby. Well, this was too much for us to take in. So much was happening at once. Maddie suggested we get a therapist to help us get through this. She offered to have a session together, and so we did. My dad, his wife, his other wife, their baby, and I went to a therapist session the next morning. Dad still gave no recognition to ever knowing us. He apologized and said he wished he could remember, but that part of his brain just seemed to have disappeared. And that's when I got the idea. Maybe if we could find something to trigger his memory, to recover that lost part, maybe he would remember us and everything would be back to normal. In the next session, I brought something with me I was sure he would remember: orange juice. The next session, I placed a glass of orange juice in front of him. My mom and I watched him closely, awaiting any reaction at all, but nothing came. But then he picked up the glass, inspecting its contents, and suddenly let go of the glass. It shattered onto the table, and slowly, miraculously, he looked at us with realization. "I remember," he said. We cried and we embraced, whilst Maddie sat to the side awkwardly. We realized what had happened and what was to come, and we leaned back. My mom was looking at Dad and to Maddie, and she looked pained at what would have to be decided next. Dad seemed to realize too, and he flicked his eyes between his two families, one of old, one of new. "Stay with Maddie, darling," said Mom. I was shocked by her words, but I knew it was the right choice. The dad we knew had left us ever since that crash. Sure, part of him remembered who we were, but everything was different now. He had a new family, and in truth, Mom and I would be fine on our own. "But," started Dad, but he ceased speaking once he looked at Maddie and his newborn baby. He nodded silently, but tears were pouring down his face. "I'm sorry it has to be like this. I still love you," he whispered. My mom looked down. "It's not your fault." She paused. "I love you too." After that session, Dad stayed with Maddie. They actually lived quite close to us, and I saw him very often. Strangely enough, my mom and Maddie became best friends. It turned out they had a lot in common. I guess my dad had a taste. It was the most peculiar of relationships. My mom and dad still shared a bond, but it was more of a friendship than that of a married couple. I actually got really close with Dad's baby. She was an adorable little girl, and I was glad I had a little sister. But some nights, I could hear my mom crying. She was very brave, but it was so much for a person to handle. For a few years, she remained on her own, and I encouraged her to find someone to love again. She deserved that much. She was hesitant, but eventually she did find someone. They are now married, and I'm so happy that my mom was able to love again. When my dad disappeared, everything in my life changed. But I guess from it, my family grew and blossomed into this beautiful thing. So I suppose I'm grateful for it, in a way.